The wind cut through the forest like a blade, whipping her hair across her face, stinging her skin. Rain soaked her clothes, turning them heavy, dragging at her limbs. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Not now. Not when every nerve in her body screamed that danger was close, that if she slowed, even for a heartbeat, it would catch her. And she could feel it. The weight of eyes tracking her, the brush of power in the air that didn't belong to her. Her lungs burned as she ran, each breath a ragged, desperate hiss. Branches clawed at her arms and shoulders, leaving red scratches that bled through her wet sleeves. She stumbled, cursing under her breath, but kept moving, the icy ground slick beneath her boots. Every slip threatened to betray her, every fall a step closer to being caught. And she could feel it, an unfamiliar, pulsing energy rising from deep inside her chest, something she had never fully understood, never fully controlled. It hummed, alive, wild, as though the forest itself recognized her fear and her power, feeding it, teasing it, waiting for her to lose herself to it. Her heart thudded in her ears, a frantic drumbeat that drowned out everything else. She could hear the sound now, soft, deliberate, a footfall not her own, and a growl, low and menacing, curling around the edges of the storm. Her skin prickled, a sharp electric tension that made her hands tremble. She wanted to run faster, but her body refused, every muscle screaming with exhaustion, every breath a burning, ragged reminder that she wasn't invincible. And she knew somewhere deep in her gut that she had to face it. She had no choice. Fog slithered through the trees like ghostly fingers wrapping around her, hiding her just enough, confusing her just enough, but not enough to keep the threat from finding her. The forest seemed alive, echoing her panic, echoing the tremor of the storm above, the rattle of thunder in the distance that matched her heartbeat. She pressed herself against the rough bark of a massive oak, the cold biting into her cheek, the rain plastering her hair to her skin, trying to make herself vanish. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was sharper than ever, sharp enough to know that power alone wouldn't save her, that speed alone wouldn't save her, that only cunning, only instinct, only every fibre of her being could keep her alive tonight. A flicker of fire danced in her vision, though no flame existed. It was inside her. A whisper of something she had been taught to fear, something that pulsed with life whenever her fear spiked. She flexed her fingers, trying to push it down, trying to keep control. But the sensation only surged, hot and unrelenting, a roaring river threatening to burst its banks. She could feel the strength lurking within her, waiting, desperate to be released, and it terrified her almost as much as the presence behind her. She stumbled again, icy water dripping into her eyes, blurring the world into a dizzying swirl of shadows and shapes. A low growl rose behind her, closer now, pressing into her skin, curling around her mind. She could smell it, the sharp scent of wet fur, danger, power. Her instincts screamed to run, to hide, to fight, and she obeyed every command, though each step felt heavier than the last. Her chest burned. Her legs quivered, and yet she ran. She ran because stopping meant surrender. Surrender meant death. And death was not an option tonight. Branches tore at her, snagging her sleeves, slapping her face, leaving angry red lines across her arms. But she didn't care. Her eyes darted ahead, searching for any break in the trees, any path that could give her the edge she needed. The forest seemed endless, and yet she pressed forward, every sense alert, every nerve taut, the storm pounding down around her like a drumbeat, orchestrating her fear. And she could feel it, that subtle tug deep in her chest, the almost imperceptible hum of power coiling inside her, threatening to explode, demanding to be unleashed. A shadow moved in her peripheral vision, swift and silent, like a ghost slipping between the trees. Her stomach knotted. Her blood ran cold, but there was a strange pull, a strange curiosity that made her hesitate for just a breath. It was a mistake she almost couldn't afford. A soft, deliberate step behind her, the crack of a twig underfoot, and her pulse slammed against her ribs. She spun, and the world seemed to tilt, the storm spinning around her, wind tearing at her clothes, rain blinding her, and still. She saw nothing, and yet she could feel it. He was close, too close. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she forced herself to move again, weaving through the jagged roots and frozen puddles. Every step is a gamble, every stumble a risk. The forest closed in around her, mist curling like serpents, rain slicing like knives across her face. And yet, through the fear, the adrenaline and the chaos, she could sense it. Her power, dormant but simmering, whispering that tonight nothing will be the same. A flash of movement, a glimpse of eyes, golden and unyielding, tracking her. Her breath hitched. She froze for a second, every instinct screaming at her to run, but something inside her trembled, a dangerous mixture of fear and thrill. The storm around her roared, the trees groaned, the world seemed to hold its breath. And in that heartbeat, she realized something terrifying. She might not just be running from danger tonight. She might be running straight into it. Her fingers clenched into fists, nails biting into palms, teeth grinding against the ache in her jaw. She could feel it now, the surge of power beneath her skin, her heartbeat sinking with it, trembling with it, a whisper of strength she had never allowed herself to embrace fully. And even as fear threatened to consume her, a spark of defiance flared inside her chest. She would not fall tonight, she would not. Not when every instinct in her screamed that she was stronger than she realized, that she had been underestimated, that she carried something no one else could touch. Lightning split the sky above, illuminating the forest in jagged brilliance. In that brief, blinding moment, she glimpsed it. The figure at the edge of the trees, tall, unyielding, impossible, and a shiver ran down her spine, half terror, half recognition. He knew her. He had been watching. And yet, for reasons she could not begin to fathom, he had not yet reached for her. She stumbled again, the ground slick, her hands clawing at the earth, mud caking beneath her fingernails. But she forced herself upright. Every muscle screamed. Every breath burned, every heartbeat threatened to betray her, but she could feel it, the undeniable pull, the stirring of something wild inside her, ready to explode, ready to protect, ready to destroy. And in that moment, amidst the storm, the fear, the chaos, she whispered to herself, almost breathless, almost afraid to say it aloud, "I will survive, no matter what, no matter who hunts me, no matter the fire inside me." Her resolve hardened, the shadows shifted, the storm raged, and from somewhere deep within the forest, a voice, a growl, a whisper, a presence responded. This was only the beginning. And if you're ready to see what happens next, make sure you subscribe to Billionaire's Desire, because this story is about to pull you into danger, passion, and secrets that will burn you alive. The storm had quieted, but only on the surface. Beneath the hush of rain and the whispering trees, danger still moved, silent, patient, and hungry. She could feel it, even now, as her breath came in shivers and her body trembled with exhaustion. The forest no longer offered comfort. Every shadow felt alive, every sound a threat. And yet, there was something else in the air now, something colder, heavier, commanding. She turned, her heartbeat faltering, her gaze drawn to the figure standing just beyond the reach of the stormlight. He wasn't supposed to be there. No one should have been. And yet, there he was, still, unwavering, as if he had been waiting for her all along. He didn't move at first, just watched her. Watched the rise and fall of her chest, the tremor in her hands, the wild defiance in her eyes. The wind bent around him, unwilling to touch him, and the rain seemed to hesitate before meeting his skin. He was carved from silence and shadow, every inch of him radiating control, the kind that didn't need to be spoken to be felt. Her pulse stumbled, not from fear, not exactly. There was something deeper, something her instincts couldn't name, but her body understood all too well. A strange current ran between them, sharp and magnetic, pulling at her even as every rational thought screamed to run. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. The light shifted, catching the edge of his face, the strong line of his jaw, the gleam in eyes that saw too much. His clothes were soaked, but he didn't look like a man caught in a storm. He looked like the storm itself, untamed, unbothered, devastatingly composed. She should have been terrified. And she was, but not for the reason she thought. He stopped just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, even through the cold rain. Every nerve in her body screamed to move, to fight, to keep her distance, but her feet refused. Her breath hitched as lightning flashed overhead, throwing them into stark relief. Her, trembling, lost. Heard notable, the eye of the chaos she couldn't escape. He said nothing. I didn't need to. His presence alone was a question she wasn't ready to answer. For a moment, all she could hear was the wind tearing through the trees and the pounding of her own heart. Then, through the rain, she saw it, the faint glimmer of something around his neck, a symbol, familiar, forbidden. It made her chest tighten, her throat close, her memories snap like brittle glass. He knew. Somehow, he knew. Her stomach twisted, everyone with fear but recognition, the kind that felt like destiny's whisper, cruel and inescapable. He had been watching her, tracking her, waiting for this moment. The storm crackled, thunder rumbling low like a growl from the earth itself. He stepped closer, and though he still hadn't spoken, she heard him in the silence. His gaze said everything, the kind of look that stripped a person bare without ever touching them. The distance between them shrank until she could see the pulse in his throat, the faint tremor of breath he was trying to hide. Power clung to him, the kind that wasn't learned or inherited, the kind that was born, commanded, feared. It was the same kind that pulsed beneath her skin, wild and volatile. For one suspended moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just them, the storm circling, the forest holding its breath. And then a sound, sharp, dangerous, close. He moved before she could think. 1 second he was still, the next he was in front of her, his hand closing around her wrist, pulling her against him with precision born from instinct. His body was warm, too warm, and his touch carried an unspoken warning that made her breath falter. She tensed, ready to fight, but something in the way he held her made her freeze. Not dominance, not possession. It was protection, fierce, silent, absolute. The kind that didn't ask for permission, only ensured survival. And then she saw it. Behind him, in the trees, a flash of movement. Eyes glinting in the dark. More than they were surrounded. Her mind raced, but his grip tightened slightly, anchoring her in the storm. She should have pulled away, should have run. But instead, her heartbeat synced with his, an invisible rhythm that calmed her just enough to breathe. He didn't look at her, but she could feel the power vibrating beneath his skin. A tension, a readiness that felt almost otherworldly. He wasn't afraid, not one of them, not of her. And that terrified her more than anything else. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, deep, the kind that didn't need volume to command attention. It slid through the chaos like silk and thunder combined. He didn't ask her name. He said it, perfectly, like he'd known it long before tonight. Her breath caught. She hadn't used that name in years, not since she'd buried the part of herself that came with it. His eyes found hers, dark and knowing, and for one raw heartbeat, she saw it, the reflection of her secrets in his gaze, the understanding that went deeper than words, as if he'd been carrying his own ghosts, his own power, his own impossible curse. The storm began to ease, the wind falling still. The forest grew quiet again, too quiet. It was the dare note that comes not from peace, but from reverence, from two forces meeting for the first time and recognizing each other. She tried to pull away, but his hand lingered for just a moment longer, his touch sparking something dangerous and alive beneath her skin. He released her then, slow, deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. The rain softened to a whisper, sliding down his face like it dared not touch him. And in that fragile stillness, the truth sank in. This man wasn't her enemy, but he wasn't her savior either. He was something in between, the storm that would destroy her or the calm that would teach her how to wield her own. Her heart stuttered, her pulse stumbled, and somewhere deep in the marrow of her fear, a spark of something else began to grow. Not safe, not relief, something far more dangerous. Desire, the kind she couldn't afford, the kind that could ruin every hierarchy. And as the storm faded and their hearts began to beat in the same rhythm, she realized the truth she didn't want to face, that the man who had just saved her might also be the one who would destroy her. If you want to know what happens next, subscribe now to Billionaire's Desire. Because every heartbeat here hides a secret, and every secret burns. The night swallowed her whole. For the first time in days, she wasn't running. She wasn't fighting. She wasn't pretending to be fine. She was just breathing, shallow, trembling breaths that felt too loud in the silence of the forest. Rain clung to her lashes, and the moon above wept behind clouds as if mourning what she'd lost. But even here, even in the stillness, her heart refused to rest. Every beat whispered his name, the alpha who had ruined her, the man who had once sworn she was his destiny, and then cast her aside like a curse. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the damp earth, feeling the hum of something deep beneath it, ancient, forbidden, alive. The same power that had always frightened her, the same power she had tried to bury, the night they branded her an outcast. She closed her eyes and memory rose like smoke. The moon had been red that night, bleeding into the sky as the pack circled her. Their growls were a song of judgment, their eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction. Her father had stood at the edge of the clearing, his face unreadable. Her mother, gone long before that night, would have wept if she'd seen it. Born of shadow, they called her, cursed with fire, and she believed them, because when rage filled her chest that night, the flames answered. They danced along her skin, flickered through her veins, and for the briefest moment the wolves stepped back. Fear, for once, was in their eyes. That was when he came, the Alpha. Tall, commanding, beautiful in the cruelest way. His eyes were a storm, his voice low and dangerous as he said her name like a promise and a warning all at once. But when the fire touched him, he didn't burn. He only looked at her like he'd seen something in her no one else dared to see, something she hadn't dared to believe in herself. The flash of memory faded with a shuddering breath. Now, years later, that same power throbbed beneath her skin again, but this time it was different. Wilder, uncontrolled, because of him. Not the Alpha who broke her, but the stranger who had found her bleeding in the woods. The man whose touch had burned through her defenses like sunlight breaking through shadow. The billionaire, the savior, the man whose name she still didn't know. She remembered his voice, smooth, deliberate, too calm for someone who just pulled her from death's edge. "You shouldn't have been out there alone," he'd said, his gaze tracing her with unnerving precision. "Not when you're being hunted." His words had struck something deep, because he'd spoken them not like a question, but like he already knew why, like he knew her. And that terrified her more than the wolves ever could, because no one knew her anymore, not really. The pack had stripped her name, her home, her identity. She had lived among humans since then, blending in, hiding the truth beneath smiles and silence. Until one mistake, one scent trail, one moment of weakness had brought it all crashing back. And now she was here, in his world. A mansion carved into the side of the mountain, with walls of glass and stone that looked down on everything, like its owner had conquered the world and was waiting for it to kneel again. But she didn't kneel anymore, not to alphas, not to men, not even to destiny. At least, that's what she told herself. The sound of footsteps behind her snapped her back to the present. She stiffened. Instinct kicked in, but before she could turn, his voice filled the air, deep and steady. "You remember, don't you?" The billionaire's tone was low, quiet, almost too careful. "What it feels like when the fire wakes." Her pulse stumbled. He shouldn't know that. He couldn't. She turned to face him, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her eyes wide with disbelief. How do you know about that?" He didn't answer at first. He only studied her. The way she held herself, the way her jaw trembled, though she tried to look unshaken. "Because I've seen it before," he said finally, "in someone else, a long time ago." The words fell between them like sparks waiting to catch flame. She wanted to look away, to run again, but there was something about him that held her there, Not dominance, not a threat. Something else, something like recognition. "Who are you?" she whispered. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Someone who's been waiting for you to remember who you are." That should have sounded insane. It should have made her leave. But instead her chest ached with something dangerous. Hope. For so long, she had believed her story ended with rejection. That she was the broken one, the cursed one, the mistake that destiny spat out and left behind. But now, standing in front of this stranger who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life, she began to wonder if maybe the curse was never hers to carry. She moved closer, slowly, drawn by something she couldn't name. The air between them buzzed with quiet tension, a pulse she could feel in her bones. And for a moment, just one, she forgot about the blood on her hands, the fear in her veins, the ghosts in her past. All she saw was him, tall, unreadable, eyes like molten gold under the dim light. He wasn't just a man. He was power wrapped in silence, pain hidden beneath control. And when he looked at her, she saw it, the same loneliness she carried. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Did he see the outcast, the rogue, the woman who had lost everything she loved? Or did he see the spark she was too afraid to touch? Maybe both. Maybe that's why he hadn't turned away. But then the air shifted, subtle, electric. She smelled it before she heard it, the metallic tang of blood and fur, the whisper of danger in the wind. They had found her again, the wolves, and just like that, the past she thought she'd left behind came crashing back with a vengeance. She froze. He didn't. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice hardening into command, but not the kind that demanded obedience, the kind that promised protection. And for the first time in years, she let someone else stand between her and danger. As the first shadow lunged from the trees, his body moved faster than her eyes could follow, a blur of strength and precision, too controlled to be human. He wasn't just a billionaire. He wasn't just powerful. He was something else, something like her. And as the realization hit her, the fire in her veins awoke again, answering not to fear this time, but to destiny. She wasn't cursed. She was chosen. And the man who stood before her, the man who fought like a storm unleashed, was not her savior by chance. He was part of her story all along, maybe even the reason she was still alive, but she didn't know that yet. She didn't know what he'd lost. She didn't know the war that bound their bloodlines before they were even born. All she knew was this: her heart had started to beat again, not for survival, but for something far more dangerous. Something she'd sworn she would never feel again. Hope, and hope was the most dangerous fire of all. If this story pulls you into its fire and you want to hear what happens next, where love meets power and fate burns brighter than the moon, don't forget to subscribe to Billionaire's Desire. More stories like this are waiting to set your heart ablaze. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. Not the calm that comes after safety, but the kind that feels like the world itself is holding its breath. The wolves had vanished into the darkness, leaving only the scent of blood and rain in their wake. The billionaire stood among the wreckage, his chest rising and falling, his eyes burning with something primal and restrained. And she couldn't look away. For a moment, neither spoke. The night between them throbbed with unspoken truths, the kind that hum louder than words ever could. Then, without turning, he said softly, "We're not safe here. There's something you need to see." The shift was subtle but sure. He led her through the mist-draped forest, each step deeper into an ancient silence that felt older than time. Branches reached overhead like fingers tangled in prayer, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. The moonlight broke through in silver shards, painting the path in ghostly glow. She wanted to ask where they were going. She wanted to demand answers about him, about what he was, about why her blood still burned when he looked at her. But something about the gravity in his voice stopped her. And so she followed, until the trees parted and the earth opened before them. It wasn't a cave, it wasn't quite a temple either. It was something in between, an ancient shrine hidden in plain sight. Carved from stone that shimmered faintly under the moonlight, it pulsed with warmth, alive, breathing. The air was thick here, heavy with old power and memory. At the center of the shrine stood a monolith, smooth, dark, and etched with symbols that seemed to shift as she stared. She didn't understand them, yet she did. Something deep inside her recognized the language, like a song she'd forgotten long ago. "What is this place?" she whispered. His answer came quietly, almost reverently. "This is where the story began, long before the pacts, long before the wars, long before you and I." He stepped closer to the stone, tracing one of the glowing marks with his fingers. It shimmered faintly under his touch, and as it did, a hum rippled through the ground, like the earth itself was awakening. "This," he said, "is the shrine of the Flameborn, the mark of your bloodline." Her stomach dropped. "My bloodline?" He turned to her then, and for the first time she saw something raw in his gaze. Awe, yes, but also sorrow. "Do you remember the night they exiled you?" he asked softly. "The flames that came when you screamed." Her breath hitched. "I didn't summon them, they just came. I thought it was a curse." He shook his head. "It wasn't a curse, it was a calling." The stone flared brighter, golden light spreading across the carvings like veins of molten fire. And then the sound, a low, ancient hum that wrapped around her bones. She felt it inside her, deep, pulsing, insistent. The voice wasn't human, it wasn't male or female, it was older than both. And it spoke in fragments, whispering through her blood. "Child of the flame, the bond of ash and moon shall awaken the lost. The one with the mark will rise, and the fire shall choose." She stumbled backward, pressing a hand to her heart as heat surged through her veins. What does that mean?" she gasped. He caught her before she fell, strong hands gripping her shoulders, steady but gentle. "It means," he said quietly, "that you were never meant to hide. The world has been waiting for you." But she didn't feel like a savior. She felt broken, bruised, haunted. Every time someone had looked at her, they'd seen danger. Every time she'd tried to belong, she'd been reminded that she wasn't normal. How could she be the answer to anything? "I can't," she whispered. "You don't understand what I've done. The people I hurt, the things I lost." He didn't flinch. "I know exactly what you've lost," he said, voice barely more than a growl. "Because I lost the same thing." Something flickered in his eyes then, a shadow she hadn't noticed before. Not arrogance, not indifference, pain. And in that pain, she saw herself reflected. The wind shifted. The shrine's light dimmed. But something else had awakened. Something not of stone, but of blood. Her hand burned suddenly. When she looked down, a faint mark appeared on her palm, a swirl of flame and crescent. It glowed briefly, then faded. But not before she saw recognition flash in his gaze. He had the same mark. "You," she breathed. "You have it too." He nodded once. "Because I was meant to find you." Her heartbeat faltered. "Why?" His voice was soft, but it carried weight. "Because prophecy never walks alone." He moved toward the monolith again, his hand brushing against the carvings. "Every generation there are two," he said, "the flame and the shadow, one to burn, one to bind, one to destroy, one to protect." She swallowed hard. "Which one am I?" He looked back at her, eyes fierce, golden, endless. "You're both. That's why they fear you." The words hit her like thunder, both. Fire and shadow, light and destruction, creation and chaos. The kind of power that could save the world, or end it. She took a step back, shaking her head. "No, I can't be that. I'm not what they think I am." He followed, his expression torn between admiration and fear. "You don't have to believe it now," he said, "but soon you'll have to choose." "Choose what?" "To embrace it, or run from it, but running never changes destiny." She wanted to scream. She wanted to tear the mark from her hand, to go back to the life she'd built in the shadows. But a part of her, the part that had always burned too bright to be normal, knew he was right. She wasn't running anymore. She was awakened. The wind rose, swirling through the shrine, carrying sparks of gold through the air. Symbols on the walls flared to life, wolves carved in firelight, women crowned in moonlight, battles fought and lost beneath bleeding skies. And in the center of it all, two figures standing side by side, the flame and the shadow, her and him. The sight made her chest tighten. Destiny wasn't a story written in stone. It was a choice wrapped in danger. And every instinct she had told her this man, this mysterious billionaire with the power in his blood, was part of hers. But the prophecy's whisper hadn't ended. In the air around them, the hum deepened. The light turned crimson, almost warning. And through the glow, new words formed on the shrine. "When the bond ignites, one must fall for the other to rise." She froze. Her gaze snapped to his, and in that heartbeat, she saw his fear mirror her own. "Tell me that doesn't mean what I think it means," she whispered. He said nothing, and silence in that moment was the most painful answer of all. The air between them crackled with truth, too dangerous, too alive to ignore. He reached out as if to comfort her, but stopped short, his hand trembling in the air between them. "If I touch you now," he said softly, "I don't think I'll be able to let go." And though her mind screamed for distance, her heart stepped closer. Because even if prophecy demanded sacrifice, even if fate demanded blood, there, under the shadow of an ancient shrine, something stronger than fear began to take root. Something wild, uncontrollable, undeniable. The beginning of the bond. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that rewrites destinies. The shrine went silent once more. The light faded, but the fire in her heart did not. As they stood facing each other, flame and shadow, marked by destiny and bound by danger, The world shifted again. And somewhere, beyond the veil of the night, the old gods whispered, "The flame has awakened." If this part of the story pulled you into its world of destiny, danger, and desire, stay tuned for the next chapter, The Bond They Can't Resist. Subscribe now to Billionaire's Desire, where passion burns, secrets unravel, and love defies fate itself. The night should have ended in silence, but silence never lasts long in a world built on secrets. When they stepped out of the shrine, the forest no longer felt the same. The air was thicker, the moonlight is colder. Something unseen was watching. He knew it first. She saw it in the way his shoulders tightened, in the way his gaze scanned the trees without moving his head, the stillness before a storm. And then, the first growl. Low, humans, angry. They came out of the shadows like wolves that had forgotten their skin. Men in dark suits, their eyes glinting with the same golden fire that lived beneath her own ribs. Not wolves tonight, not yet, but close enough to feel the beast clawing beneath their polished surface. He stepped in front of her before she could breathe. "Stay behind me," he murmured, voice cold enough to slice through fear. But fear didn't need slicing. It was already bleeding into her veins. The men fanned out, surrounding them. Their leader, tall, broad, and smirking like he owned the moonlight, stepped forward. "Lucian," he said, his tone dripping with false civility. "You've been busy." Lucian, the billionaire she'd thought was untouchable, didn't blink. "Elias," he replied, calm but lethal. "You're trespassing." "Am I?" Elias smiled wider, showing the faint glint of fang. "Looks like you've forgotten the rules. No outsiders, no flameborn, no mixing bloodlines." His gaze shifted to her, hungry, mocking. And yet, here she is. The words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they echoed the lies she'd heard her whole life. Monster, cursed, dangerous. She felt the weight of 100 watching eyes, invisible in the shadows. The world had found her again. Lucian took a step forward, his voice low and dangerous. "She's under my protection." Elias laughed, slow and cruel. "Your protection? Or your bed?" A murmur rippled through the trees, the kind that feeds off tension and blood. "You think being a billionaire makes you untouchable, Lucian. The council won't protect you when they find out what you've done." Lucian's jaw tightened. "Let them come." She reached for his arm, a small movement, desperate and instinctive. "Don't," she whispered. "You don't have to fight them." He didn't look at her. "That's where you're wrong." It happened fast. The air cracked, a shimmer of energy, raw and electric, and the first strike came. Elias moved like lightning, claws flashing as the beast half broke through his skin. Lucian met him head-on. The forest exploded into chaos. Branches shattered. The ground trembled beneath the weight of power meeting power. Sparks, real, burning, blinding, flared between them as their auras collided. She stumbled backward, heart pounding, the prophecies' whisper echoing in her skull. When the bond ignites, one must fall for the other to rise. Was this what it meant? To rise through blood? To love through violence? Elias struck again, this time aiming for her. But before his claws could touch her skin, a blast of heat erupted. Uncontrolled, furious, hers. Flames tore through the air, wrapping around her like living serpents. She didn't command them, they simply obeyed. The men fell back, shielding their faces, shouting her name, not in reverence but in fear. Because the fire didn't just burn the trees, it burned through the truth. Lucian turned to her, breath ragged, eyes wide, not in horror but in realization. "She's awakening," he said, half to himself. "It's starting." And in that moment, she understood. The world didn't want her awake. From the darkness beyond the flames came new voices, familiar ones, voices she hadn't heard since the night of her exile. "Arya," one of them called. "You shouldn't have come back." Her heart stopped. That voice, cold, measured, unforgettable, belonged to the woman who'd once been her mentor. The one who'd turned her away when her power first burned through her skin. "Lydia," she whispered. The woman stepped forward, her silver hair gleaming like frost under the firelight. "This isn't your fight anymore," Lydia said. "You were given a chance to disappear, to survive. You should have taken it." Arya's voice shook. "And let them erase me." "They already did," Lydia said softly. "You just refused to die." Lucian moved between them again, but Lydia's gaze cut to him with quiet venom. "You think she's your weapon. You think you can protect her, but you don't understand what she is." He met her stare evenly. "Then enlighten me." Lydia's eyes softened, with sorrow, not mercy. "She's the heir to the flame-born throne, the last descendant of the blood that destroyed the old world. And if she wakes fully, she'll destroy this one too." The words struck like thunder. Arya felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "I never asked for any of this," she whispered. "I just want to be free." Lydia shook her head. "Freedom isn't for those with fire in their blood." Lucian's voice came low, steady, almost pleading. "She's not your enemy, Lydia. The council has twisted the prophecy to keep her afraid. You know that." Lydia's expression flickered, a crack in the mask. But then it hardened. "Even if that's true, the world isn't ready for her, and neither are you." Then to Arya. "Leave him before it's too late. The council is already moving. They'll burn everything you touch." Arya stared at the flames licking the edge of the shrine's stone path, feeling the heat mirror her heartbeat. "I've been burned before," she said quietly. "I'm still standing." But standing wasn't enough, not when the sky itself was starting to split. The first howl cut through the air, sharp, guttural, echoing across miles. It wasn't human, and it wasn't friendly. Lucian's head snapped up. "They're coming." "Who?" Arya asked. He looked at her with eyes that gleamed like molten gold. "The ones who want your fire and my blood." The world erupted. Figures poured from the tree line, half-shifted wolves. Human soldiers, beasts caught between. The rival pack, the corporate assassins, the monsters they had both once served. Elias roared, lunging again. Lydia vanished into the mist, the air filled with claws, steel, and screams. Lucian grabbed her hand, dragging her toward the edge of the clearing. "We have to go," she stumbled, her vision blurred with smoke and memory. "No, we can't just run." "Arya!" He turned, eyes fierce. "If they catch you, they'll cage you. And if they cage you, they'll use you." The word used hit her harder than any blow, because deep down she knew. It wasn't the first time someone had wanted her for what she was, not who. They ran. Through fire and shadow, through the screams of wolves and men, through the echo of prophecy ringing in her skull. The ground cracked beneath them. splitting open like the world itself wanted them apart. A blast, sudden, deafening, knocked them off their feet. Lucian hit the ground first, rolling to his knees. Blood streaked his face, his shirt torn. She crawled to him, shaking. "You're hurt," he laughed, low, rough. "You should see the other guy." But when he tried to stand, his leg buckled. The scent of blood filled the air, his blood. And for the first time since meeting him, she saw fear flash behind his confidence, not for himself, for her. He reached for her, gripping her wrist tightly. "Listen to me," he said, voice breaking. "If they find us, if I don't make it out, you run. You hear me? You keep running." Her breath caught. "I'm not leaving you." "You don't have a choice." Tears blurred her vision, but she shook her head, stubborn, wild, burning. "No. You pulled me out of the dark once. I'm not going back without you." Something in his gaze softened, a mixture of pride and pain. "You're going to get yourself killed. Then I'll die free." The moment stretched between them, fragile, infinite, and then the forest roared again, a flash of silver, a scream, and Lucian was gone, dragged into the smoke by shadows that moved like men but howled like wolves. She ran after him, but the flames rose higher, blocking her path. The heat burned her lungs, but not as much as the fear that cracked open inside her. She could hear his voice still, faint, distant, calling her name. But the prophecy's whisper was louder. "One must fall for the other to rise." She fell to her knees, her heart pounding like thunder in a storm that would not end. Her fire flickered weakly in her hands, not enough to save, not enough to destroy, only enough to remember. The forest went quiet again, too quiet, and this time the silence was worse than any scream, because she knew the world had made its move, and the war for her soul had just begun. If this part grips your heart, don't miss what comes next. Bound by blood, the betrayal of fire and shadow. Subscribe to Billionaire's Desire, where power meets passion, and every heartbeat carries a secret worth dying for. The night deepened around them, soft and solemn, as if the world itself had grown weary of fighting. The forest was quiet now, too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin, heavy and watchful. A faint mist hung low over the ground, swirling like pale smoke around the ruins of what once had been a hunting lodge. The air was cool, touched by the lingering scent of rain and pine. Inside, a fire crackled in the corner of the stone hearth, throwing uneven shadows against the walls. She sat near the flames, knees drawn close, her body shivering. Not from cold, but from everything she had seen, everything she still carried. The light kissed her face in soft orange hues, flickering across the fading bruise at her jawline, the cut near her temple. She had stopped bleeding, but inside, she still was. Across from her, he stood by the window, half in shadow. The moonlight poured over his shoulders like liquid silver, illuminating the sharp lines of his face, the quiet strength in his stillness. He hadn't spoken in a long while. He didn't have to. His presence alone filled the space, like the low hum of a storm gathering in the distance. When he finally turned toward her, the movement was slow, deliberate, almost tender. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice roughened with something that wasn't anger, something deeper, harder to name. She looked up at him, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "And go where? Back to the pack that wants me dead? To the humans who whisper monster every time I pass?" Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the rawness of truth. He didn't answer. He only walked closer, his steps quiet on the stone floor. When he stopped, he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, the steady rhythm of his breath. The scent of him, cedar, smoke, rain, curled into her senses, grounding her and unraveling her all at once. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire popped, and outside a wolf howled, low, mournful, distant. "You're still bleeding," he murmured finally, kneeling beside her. His hand brushed her arm, rough calloused fingers gliding gently over her skin. Her body stiffened, every muscle coiling in defense. But he didn't pull away. He took a strip of cloth from his pocket, wrapping it around her arm, his touch firm but careful. She studied him quietly, her chest tightening. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "You barely know me." He looked up at her then, his eyes catching the firelight. "I know enough." Her heart stuttered. "Enough to what?" His lips parted, but the words didn't come right away. When they did, they sounded more like a confession than an answer. "Enough to know I should have stayed away, and enough to know that I can't." The firelight flickered between them, catching on the wet glint in her eyes. Something fragile and dangerous passed in that silence, like the thin line between trust and ruin. She wanted to look away, to guard herself again, but the exhaustion in her bones was too deep. "Everyone who's ever said that," she murmured, voice soft, "has ended up leaving when it mattered." "I'm not everyone," he said. She laughed, a short, broken sound. "No, you're worse. You're the man who holds all the power in the city, and yet you hide in a forest pretending not to care about the empire you built. What are you really running from?" His jaw tensed. The truth flickered in his eyes before he could bury it. "The same thing you are," he said. "My past." She looked at him then, not as the billionaire, the savior, or the alpha, but as a man whose ghosts were as restless as her own. And something inside her softened. Just a little. The wind sighed through the cracks in the wall. The fire hissed. Their shadows swayed together in the dim light. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was low, almost breaking. "There was a time I thought I could fix everything. That money, power, control, they'd keep everyone safe. But then my pack turned on me, my family, my mate." His voice trailed off. "I lost them all." She turned to look at him, her breath catching. "You had a mate?" His nod was barely there. "Once. She died because of a choice I made. I thought I could carry that guilt forever. Then you walked into my life and suddenly, it doesn't feel like forever anymore." Her heart twisted. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't make me your redemption. I'm barely holding on myself." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe we're both just trying to remember what it feels like to breathe without guilt." For a long while, neither spoke. The world outside seemed to fade, the wind, the wolves, even the moonlight, all dissolving into the quiet between them. Her voice came out softer, hesitant. "When you look at me, what do you see?" He turned to her fully now, his gaze unflinching. "I see someone who's been broken and still chooses to stand. I see fire where others see fear. I see you." The words hit her like a touch, not on her skin, but deeper, where no one had ever dared to look. The silence that followed was charged, electric, tender, dangerous. Her breathing hitched. She could feel the pull between them, like gravity had found its way into her veins. Her hand trembled as she reached for the edge of the blanket, clutching it to her chest as if it could shield her from the warmth blooming there. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because I might start believing them." He leaned closer then, slow enough that she could have pulled away if she wanted to. But she didn't. The world narrowed to the sound of their breathing, the faint crackle of the fire, the wild, reckless beat of her heart. His hand brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering at her jaw. "You can," he said. "You can believe me." For a heartbeat, everything stopped, the fear, the past, the noise inside her head. There was only this. Two broken souls suspended in the quiet truth of each other's presence. She looked into his eyes and saw not perfection, but pain. Not promises, but possibilities. And then softly, she whispered the question that had haunted her since the night they met. "Can I trust you?" He didn't answer right away. He just held her gaze, steady and unflinching. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with honesty. "No," he said, "but you can try." Something inside her broke, something that had been holding her hostage for far too long. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You make it sound so simple." "It isn't," he replied. "But maybe it's worth it." Their eyes stayed locked, suspended between danger and desire. The tension was unbearable, fragile, perfect. He leaned in, close enough for her to feel his warmth, to smell the faint trace of rain still clinging to him. The fire crackled louder, almost urging them forward. But before his lips could find hers, she pulled back, just slightly, but enough to stop time itself. "I'm not ready," she said, her voice trembling but steady. He nodded once, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Then I'll wait." She looked away, her pulse still racing, her heart aching in ways she didn't understand. "You don't even know what you're waiting for." He smiled faintly. "I do. I'm waiting for you to stop running." The firelight danced between them, and for a brief, fragile moment, it felt like the world outside could wait. Because here, in the flickering warmth and silence of the night, something sacred was being rebuilt. Not trust, not yet, but the faint, trembling beginning of it. And though she wouldn't say it out loud, a small part of her, buried deep beneath fear and fire, hoped he wouldn't give up on waiting. Because for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to run. The dawn broke cruelly. A pale, colourless light bled through the clouds, slicing across the mountain ridge like a blade. The fire that had kept them safe through the night was now nothing but ash and memory, whispering smoke into the cold air. She stood at the edge of the clearing, wrapped in silence so heavy it pressed against her lungs. Her eyes were hollow, searching the horizon as if it might offer her something other than the truth she was about to face. The forest around them was still, too still. Even the birds refused to sing. Behind her she could feel his gaze. The alpha, the billionaire, the man who had promised to wait. And for a fleeting heartbeat, she wished time would stop, freeze them both in that fragile peace between confession and consequence. But the world had other plans. The crunch of boots against gravel shattered the stillness. Voices followed, sharp, familiar, and full of authority. When she turned, a line of figures was emerging from the fog. Council guards in black coats, the silver insignia of the blood pact gleaming on their collars. At their center stood a woman in crimson. Sharp eyes, cold smile, voice like polished steel. "Lila Grey," the woman said, her tone dripping with venom. "You are hereby summoned before the High Council for crimes against the Pack, the Crown, and the Sacred Order." Lila didn't move, she didn't breathe. The sound of her name, her true name, struck like lightning. No one had spoken it in years. The Alpha, Damien, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice calm but edged. "She's under my protection." The woman in red smiled faintly, as if she'd been expecting that. "Your protection?" she asked. "Or your possession?" Her gaze flicked between them, assessing, calculating. How fitting! The fallen Alpha and the forbidden heir. Lila froze. Forbidden heir. Her chest was constricted. The words rippled through the clearing, heavy and damning, and then it all began to unravel. Behind the guards, a shimmer in the air, magic, stirring, humming, alive. The mark on Lila's wrist burned, glowing faintly beneath her skin. She clutched her hand to her chest, the light searing through her like fire made of memory. She saw flashes, her mother's eyes, the night of the burning, the prophecy whispered over her cradle. "The child of the flame shall rise from ruin." She had spent her life running from it, burying it beneath pain and denial. But now there was no more hiding. "She's the reason the blood moon broke its cycle," the Crimson Woman declared. "She carries the power that ended the last Alpha line, the flame that consumes all it touches." Lila's breath came fast, uneven. "That's not true," she whispered, but even she could hear the lie in her voice. Damien looked at her then, really looked, and she saw it in his eyes. Recognition, shock, fear. He knew. The space between them fractured. "Lila!" His voice broke her name in half. "Why didn't you tell me?" She couldn't answer. How could she explain that she hadn't wanted him to look at her like this, like she was something to be controlled or pitied or destroyed? Because the truth wasn't beautiful, it was monstrous. The ground trembled. The air thickened with energy as her emotions spiraled. Her pulse beat wild in her ears, echoing the rhythm of the mark beneath her skin. "You have no idea what they'll do to you," Damien said, stepping closer. "Let me handle this." She took a step back. "Handle it? You mean to decide my fate for me, like they did to you?" "Lila, please, no." Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. "Don't say my name like you still believe in it." The Crimson Woman smiled wider. "Touching," she murmured. "But loyalty cannot erase blood. She is the lost child of House Moraine, the bloodline cursed by the flame." A murmur rippled through the guards. Some took a step back, others tightened their grip on their weapons. Lila's knees nearly buckled. The name Moraine felt like ice in her veins. The legacy she'd tried to bury had clawed its way to the surface, and now everyone knows. "Seize her," the woman ordered. Two guards moved forward. Damien growled, a low primal sound that vibrated through the clearing. The shift shimmered beneath his skin, his power crackling like stormlight. "Don't," he warned. But they didn't stop, and everything happened at once. Lila's pulse exploded in her ears. The mark on her wrist ignited, spilling light across her body, white-hot and furious. The world went silent for a breath, and then the air detonated. A blast of pure energy surged outward, throwing the guards to the ground. The trees groaned. Fire streaked across the grass, wild and alive, wrapping around her like armor. When the light faded, she stood in the center of the chaos, eyes glowing, breath heavy, power pulsing in waves. Everyone stared, even Damien. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her, tell her it was okay, that he'd known all along she was different. But he didn't move. He just stared, torn between awe and fear. And that was worse than betrayal. "Now you see," she whispered. "This is what I was trying to protect you from." "Lila, don't," she said again. Her voice shook. "You looked at me like I was human. Don't take that away now." The fire flickered brighter for an instant, responding to her grief. Then she turned away. The crimson woman rose slowly, brushing soot from her cloak. Her smile was cold, victorious. "You can't fight what you are," she said. "The flame consumes, Lila. It always does." Lila's hands curled into fists, the heat beneath her skin trembling to break free again. "Maybe," she said softly. "But so does love." The words hung in the air, fragile and final. Then she ran. Her feet pounded against the ground, the forest swallowing her whole. Branches clawed at her skin, rain slicked her hair, and somewhere behind her voices shouted her name. But she didn't stop, couldn't. Because if she stayed, she'd break. And if she broke, she'd burn everything she ever touched. The storm chased her through the trees, rain and lightning clashing like a war above. Her lungs screamed, her heart ached, but she didn't slow. Every step carried her farther from him, and yet, somehow, closer to what she truly was. When she reached the ridge, she looked back once. The mansion below was in flames. The world she'd known, his world, was collapsing under the weight of truth. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like power, but that power came with pain. Because behind her, in that burning ruin, stood the only man who had ever seen her. Not as a weapon, not as a prophecy, but as a woman worth saving. She whispered into the wind, "You should have let me go sooner." Lightning split the sky, the ground shook, and somewhere deep in the distance a howl echoed, low, aching, endless. The storm swallowed her, and the world went dark. The betrayal was complete. The enemy had won, at least for now. But beneath the ashes of everything she'd lost, something ancient stirred inside her chest. Not despair, not defeat, something else. The beginning of a reckoning. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. The storm had settled over the mountains like a curse. Dark clouds swirling endlessly. Thunder grumbling as if the heavens themselves were restless. Beneath that endless sky, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, out of the silence, a figure emerged. She moved like the storm was part of her. The wind bending to her will, the rain parting around her body as though even the sky feared to touch her. Her bare feet sank into the soaked earth, leaving behind faint trails of light that shimmered, silver and alive. Her hair, once tangled and wild, now streamed behind her like dark silk in the wind. Lila Grey had returned, but she was no longer the hunted girl who had fled into the night. She was the fire they had tried to extinguish, and failed. Every heartbeat echoed with power now. It didn't just hum beneath her skin, it sang. She could feel the rhythm of the earth, the pulse of the storm, the ancient whisper of her bloodline. For the first time, she didn't shrink from it. She didn't hide. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her gaze fixed on the ruins of what had once been Damien's estate, now a charred scar upon the hillside. Smoke curled upward, the scent of ash and iron still heavy in the air. And beneath that scent, faint but unmistakable, she caught it, his scent. Damien was alive, but so was the one who had taken everything from them. The Crimson Woman, Seraphine, the High Council's enforcer, had rebuilt her forces. The last time Lila had seen her, Seraphine had been drenched in soot and fury, swearing vengeance. Now she ruled the ruins, gathering the remnants of the council's guard, using them to hunt Lila's kind like wolves, cornering prey. And Damien, he was her prize. Lila could feel the bond, faint, fractured, but still there. A thread of warmth deep in her chest that pulsed every time she drew breath. He was still fighting, still alive, still hers. Lightning slashed across the sky, illuminating the broken mansion below, a palace of glass and ruin. At its center, the great hall had been rebuilt as something darker, a place of judgment. Chains hung from the ceiling, the walls lined with obsidian mirrors etched with runes. And in the middle of it all, bound by silver and shadow, knelt Damien. Blood streaked his face, his head bowed, his hands trembling against the chains. Seraphine stood before him, her cloak gleaming like fresh blood under the lightning. "You could have ruled beside me," Seraphine said, her voice echoing through the hall. "But you chose her, the cursed one, the flame that destroyed your house." Damien lifted his head slowly. Even beaten, even broken, his eyes held fire. "I chose love," he rasped, "and that's something you'll never understand." Seraphine's smile was slow, cold. "Then you'll die for it." The storm cracked open like a scream, and that was when Lila arrived. She stepped into the hall without sound, the air warping around her. The scent of ozone filled the space. The flames in the sconces flickered and bowed toward her like they recognized their master. Every head turned, every breath stopped. Seraphine's eyes widened, just slightly. "You," she whispered, "you should have burned away." "I did," Lila said softly, "and what rose from the ashes isn't something you can kill." Power rippled outward, unseen but undeniable. The silver chains around Damien rattled, as though recognizing her heartbeat. The air shimmered with heat, her presence alone bending the light. Seraphine raised a hand. "Seize her!" But no one moved. The guards looked at one another, fear blooming in their eyes. They'd heard the stories. The girl who had shattered an entire council with a single scream. The flame that burned but did not consume. When no one stepped forward, Seraphine's smile twisted into rage. "Then I'll do it myself." She drew her blade, a silver edge humming with dark energy, and lunged. Lila didn't flinch. The moment the blade came close, fire burst from her skin, coiling around her like living armor. The impact sent Seraphine flying backward, her weapon shattering into shards that melted before they hit the floor. Lila raised her hand slowly. The air crackled. Sparks danced between her fingers. "You wanted a monster," she said, her voice low and trembling with power. "You made one." Seraphine staggered to her feet, fury burning in her eyes. "You think this is power?" she spat. "You're nothing but a spark, and sparks fade." "Then watch me burn," Lila whispered. She lifted both hands. The storm above the mansion roared in response. Lightning tore through the ceiling, slamming into the floor between them. Fire erupted, golden, white, pure. The energy radiated outward, throwing guards to the ground, cracking the marble, and shattering the obsidian mirrors that lined the walls. And for the first time, the flame didn't frighten her. It belonged to her. Images flickered through her mind, her mother's face, the night she fled the pack, the years she'd hidden, terrified of what she might become. Every scar, every heartbreak, every betrayal had been fuel. And now she burned with purpose. Seraphine screamed, her own energy colliding with Lila's, red and gold clashing, fury against fate. The air between them shimmered, twisting and groaning under the force. Sparks became firestorms, shadows became walls. The floor cracked open, the world itself bending around their rage. "Why fight?" Seraphine shouted over the roar. "You could rule with me. Together we could—" "No," Lila cut in, her voice steady and full of light. "You destroy to rule. I burn to heal." With a motion as gentle as a breath, she released everything. The light exploded. Fire filled the room, wrapping around Seraphine, consuming her power, stripping her darkness away until only silence remained. When the flames faded, Seraphine was gone. Nothing remained but her cloak, a heap of ash and crimson at Lila's feet. The world went still, and then a sound, faint, fragile. "Lila!" "Damien." She turned, the fire softening around her as she knelt beside him. His eyes were glassy with pain, his skin streaked with silver burns. She touched his cheek, her hand trembling, and the chains fell away like dust. "I told you not to come back," he whispered, voice broken but full of awe. She smiled faintly. "And missed the chance to prove you wrong?" He let out a weak laugh, just enough to make her heart ache. The light around her dimmed to a soft glow, golden and gentle. "You were never my weakness, Damien," she said. "You were the reason I found my strength." She rested her forehead against his, their breaths mingling. The storm outside began to quiet, the thunder fading into soft rain. For a moment, there was peace. But as she looked around the ruins, something deeper stirred inside her. Something vast and ancient, like the echo of the prophecy itself. The ground beneath her hummed with energy, the flame inside her shifting from chaos to clarity. The prophecy had never been about destruction, it was about rebirth. Her power wasn't meant to consume, it was meant to cleanse. She stood, the rain washing over her, the last embers of the fire fading into mist. The clouds broke open, revealing the first hint of dawn. The light touched her face, and for the first time in years, she didn't look away. The world had feared her flame, but now it would need it. Lila Grey was no one's sacrifice. She was the beginning of something new. And as the sun rose over the ashes, she whispered to the wind, a promise soft but unbreakable. "This isn't the end." The forest trembled, the ruins gleamed faintly, and somewhere deep in the distance, a single howl carried through the light. The legend had only just begun. Under the newborn sun, the world was too quiet. The storm had passed, but its memory hung in the air, the scent of scorched earth, the faint echo of thunder trembling through the mountains. The ruins of the old estate steamed under the pale light, each stone glistening as if weeping for what had been lost. Lila stood at the centre of it all, motionless. The fire that had consumed Seraphine still shimmered faintly around her skin, like the storm's heartbeat had merged with her own. The rain had washed away the ash, but not the memory of what she had done. She had saved him. She had destroyed everything. Damien's breath came slow behind her. His strength was returning, but his silence cut deeper than any blade. He watched her, the woman who had once been his heart, now standing like something divine and untouchable. The light of dawn caught in her hair. For a moment, it looked like her soul was made of sunlight and shadow. And then she turned to face him. The bond between them trembled. It was still there, fragile, faint, but unbroken. Yet it no longer felt the same. Once it had been warm. Now it hummed with power that frightened even her. She had burned Seraphine to nothing, but in doing so, she had awakened something within herself. Something ancient, something more than wolf. And the truth was beginning to scare her. "Say something," she whispered. Her voice was small, almost human again. "Please." Damien's gaze didn't waver. His jaw tightened as he rose slowly to his feet, chains clattering away from his wrists. "You shouldn't have come back for me," he said. The words sliced through her. "I couldn't leave you." "You should have," he cut in, voice low, heavy. "You have no idea what you've become, Lila. What I saw in your eyes when you fought her, that wasn't just power. It was something else." She flinched, stepping back. The air between them rippled. "You think I don't feel it too?" she said, her tone trembling with exhaustion. "You think I don't know what's happening to me?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Damien's expression softened, but only slightly. "You saved us," he murmured, "but at what cost?" Her lips parted, but no words came, because deep down she knew he was right. Something inside her had changed, not just her power, but her heart. She could still feel the rush of it, the wildness, the intoxicating freedom of absolute strength. For a moment, she had felt like a god, and gods didn't love the way humans or wolves did. She turned away from him, her gaze tracing the horizon where the mist was beginning to lift. The forest looked different now, quieter, wary, as if it too was deciding whether to bow to her or run. The bond between her and the land pulsed like a heartbeat. She could feel every breath of wind, every creature stirring in the distance. It was exhilarating and terrifying. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet. "I thought I was fighting to save the pack, to save you, but maybe I was fighting to prove something else." "What?" Damien asked, his tone sharp. "That I wasn't the curse they said I was," she whispered, "that I could control it." "And can you?" His words fell heavy, cold, honest. Lila closed her eyes. The silence was her answer. The world held its breath again. Then a sound, a low growl from deep in the forest. The surviving wolves of the pack had returned, circling the clearing, watching her from the shadows. Their eyes glowed in the dim light, full of fear and awe. One by one they lowered their heads. Not in hatred, not in worship, in recognition. The flame in her chest flickered uncertainly. She didn't want their reverence. She wanted their trust. But could she even ask for it after what they'd seen, after what she'd become? Her gaze drifted back to Damien. His face was unreadable, torn between admiration and dread. She could see it in his eyes. The man who had once vowed to die for her wasn't sure if he could still stand beside her, and that broke her more than any battle could. She took a trembling breath and said softly, "If you fear me, I'll understand." He didn't answer. Her heart ached, that deep, soul-level ache that came when you realized the person you loved saw something in you couldn't change. She turned away before the tears could fall. Maybe the stories were right, she whispered to herself. Maybe the cursed bloodline wasn't meant to be loved. Maybe it was meant to cleanse the world before it consumed itself. The wind picked up, swirling around her like 1,000 whispers. Her power pulsed again, brighter, bolder, refusing to be contained. The wolves in the forest backed away. Even the light seemed to bend from her presence. Damien took a step forward, then stopped. His breath hitched. Lila. She looked over her shoulder. The expression on her face was unreadable, strength and sorrow woven into one. Don't follow me, she said quietly. If I stay, I'll destroy what little peace we have left. He shook his head. You don't have to do this alone. I already am, she said. You just haven't realized it yet. The moment lingered between them like a wound that refused to close. Then she walked into the light. The forest parted for her, every branch bowing, every shadow retreating. The wolves watched as she passed, their ears flattening in silent respect. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Damien fell to his knees, hands pressed against the earth she'd walked on. His chest heaving as though his heart had been ripped open. The bond between them pulsed once and then went still. For the first time since the day they met, he couldn't feel her anymore. The dawn burned brighter, the ruins smoked, the air felt empty, and somewhere deep within the woods, a single voice whispered, not quite hers, not quite human, "The world has changed, will you?" Would you have trusted her, or would you have feared her too? Would you have reached out, knowing the fire might consume you, or would you have turned away, praying the flame would die on its own? Because love that burns this bright never asks permission. It devours, it transforms, it leaves nothing untouched. And now the question isn't what she became. It's what you would have done if it were you standing in Damien's place. Would you still call her yours, or would you whisper her name like a warning? If this story lit a fire inside you, if it made your heart race, your soul ache, and your breath catch, then don't let it fade. Subscribe to Billionaire's Desire, where every story will make you feel something real, where power, passion, and secrets intertwine. Because sometimes the most dangerous love stories are the ones that ask you to choose a side. So tell me, would you have chosen her or feared her too? The forest was quiet again, too quiet. The kind of silence that feels alive, listening, waiting. Smoke drifted lazily through the broken trees, soft tendrils curling into the dawn light. The ruins of the old estate shimmered like a graveyard of memories. Ash coated the air, settling on everything. The shattered gates, the cold marble steps. The earth still trembling beneath what had been unleashed. And through that silence, two figures walked, side by side, yet separated by more than distance. Lila's bare feet brushed against the wet ground, leaving faint prints that glowed faintly with golden embers before fading. Damien walked a step behind her, his eyes locked on the back of her neck, on the faint mark that now pulsed beneath her skin, the mark of the flame-bound. It was beautiful, terrifying, irrevocable. Neither spoke for a long time. The world felt suspended between endings and beginnings, too fragile to breathe, too heavy to hope. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine, earth, and blood. It reminded them both that survival came with a price, one neither of them had fully reckoned with. Finally, Damien broke the silence. His voice was low, uncertain, almost human again. So what now? Lila didn't stop walking. Her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, where the forest melted into the mist. Now, she said softly, now we wait. For what? She turned then, slowly, and the light caught her face. For a heartbeat, he saw the woman she'd been before all of this. The one who'd laughed, who'd loved, who'd once believed she could outrun fate. But there was something else there now too. Something ancient and knowing. For what's coming? She whispered. Damien's brows furrowed. You think this is over? Her lips curved, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. The fire doesn't end when the flames die. It burns under the ashes, waiting for a reason to rise again. Her words settled between them like prophecy. He stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat still radiating from her skin. Then tell me, Lila, are you still you? Or has the fire taken everything? Her eyes met his. For a moment, the bond between them pulsed faintly again. Softer this time, calmer, but alive. Maybe I'm both, she said. Maybe that's the point. The trees around them groaned as if shifting under unseen weight. Far above, ravens circled, black wings cutting through pale light, watching, waiting. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long, mournful, echoing through the valley. It wasn't one of theirs. Lila froze. Her pulse quickened, the hairs on her arms rising. That howl wasn't a warning. It was a call. Damien felt it too. That ancient pull deep in his bones, the way his wolf stirred in response. They're still out there, he murmured. The ones who fled before the battle. She nodded slowly. Not just them. Something older. The earth beneath their feet thrummed faintly. The same rhythm she'd felt the night before the prophecy had revealed itself. The mark on her neck flared, a soft glow pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She glanced down at it, her breath trembling. The flame chose me for a reason, she whispered, but I don't think I was the only one it marked. Damien's eyes darkened. What do you mean? Before she could answer, the wind shifted again, colder this time, carrying with it the faintest scent of iron and roses. A scent she recognized instantly. Her breath hitched. Seraphine's bloodline, she said under her breath. It didn't end with her. The forest seemed to react, shadows lengthening, air tightening. Somewhere deep within the mist, faint laughter echoed, not mocking, not cruel, just knowing. Lila turned toward the sound, her eyes narrowing. The mark on her neck blazed brighter. Someone's watching us, Damien muttered, his wolf growling low. Yes, she said, and they want us to know it. For a moment, the two of them stood side by side again. No words, no promises, just the quiet hum of something vast shifting in the world around them. The dawn broke fully then, spilling light across the battlefield of their past. It should have felt like peace. It didn't. Lila's voice was soft when she finally spoke again. You asked what happens now, she said, looking toward the rising sun. The truth is, this was never the end. He studied her profile, the determination there, the fire still flickering behind her eyes. Then what is it? Her gaze drifted upward, toward the sky where the ravens still circled. The beginning of something we were never meant to survive. He stepped closer, the tension between them snapping taut again. Then we face it together. Her jaw tightened. For a moment he thought she'd refuse, but then she met his eyes and said quietly, "Together, until the fire chooses again." He frowned. "Chooses again?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and brushed her fingers against his wrist, just enough to let him feel the heat beneath her skin. It was like touching lightning, alive and wild. Then she turned and walked away, her figure swallowed by the mist that clung to the trees. Damien stayed where he was, watching her until she disappeared completely. His heart ached, not from fear, but from knowing that whatever lay ahead, neither of them could go back to who they'd been. The wind whispered through the ruins again, carrying her voice, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The true heir hasn't revealed themselves yet. Damien's chest tightened. He looked toward the forest, eyes narrowing, his instincts awakening again. Because he could feel it now, that faint hum beneath the soil, the gathering of something old and powerful. The world wasn't healing, it was shifting, preparing. And somewhere, someone was waiting for the right moment to strike. The mark on his own arm, the faint scar from where her flames had once touched him, flickered briefly with heat. His pulse quickened. Whatever had tied them together hadn't ended, it had evolved. And somewhere beyond the tree line, in the shadows that still clung to the waking earth, another pair of eyes opened, glowing gold, ancient and patient. A whisper drifted through the trees. "She thinks she's the only one." The voice was neither male nor female. It was older than both, laced with hunger and promise. She was never the only one. The sound faded, swallowed by the wind. The world exhaled. And the story, their story, slipped quietly into the breathless space between what was and what will be. The storm had passed, but storms always return. The fire might rest, but embers remember. And somewhere, in the echoing heart of the wild, destiny was already stirring again. Narrator's voice softens invitingly. This isn't over. The marks have been made. The bond still burns. And the true heir hasn't revealed themselves. Not yet. If your heart still races with the echo of their fire, if your soul aches to know what comes after the ashes, then you already belong here. Subscribe to Billionaire's Desire, where love meets destiny, where every scar tells a story, and where every ending is only the beginning of something far more dangerous. Because in their world, the flames never die, they only wait, to be continued.